I just didn't really understand when I came in as mayor what the crime was like and because as you said, it's in one part of the city, and if that's not your part of the city, you're just not that aware of it. But I had one of the best learning experiences. I had a young woman, I bet she was about 35. She came to every city council meeting, and she would just berate me about what was going on in the city and that I didn't know what was going on, and just every single time. So she said, I bet you've never even been to my neighborhood. And I said, I don't know what neighborhood you live in, but you never asked me. But if you'd like me to come visit your neighborhood, I'll do it. Would you like to do this afternoon? She was startled by that. She said, no, I can't do it this afternoon. But I said, well, you just choose a day, except Tuesday. That's when our council meetings. She lived in public housing, and it was the best learning experience that I've ever had because it was in August. There's no air conditioning. It was 4 stories. There was lots of children there. No place for them to play, no swings, it was just a terrible place to live. And and I took my city council too, so we were all there to see it. And I said, this just shouldn't happen. And so she became my helper to change things. Well, it's the land of the free and home of the brave. Stairs in the house of the community. But leave them alone and what they're gonna say. With the clean black and markers here to stay.
As you know, on the TeeCast, we do not include politicism in any way. We want to discuss ideas in their essence without bias. In this particular case, I think it's going to be kind of impossible not to drag politics into some of our conversations because the next guest is a professional politician. If you don't recognize her name, then I encourage you to not delve into what side she lies because her approach to ideas and humans and conversations is unique and appreciable, whether you agree or not. She is an educator, a businesswoman, a very successful politician, and a pioneer for women. She's an author of a very interesting book. And I really look forward to sharing this time that I spent with her, with you. And without further ado, let's welcome Congresswoman Kay Granger. Can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what you maybe wanted to be? Do you have any aspirations as a youngster?
I grew up in Fort Worth, lived in East Fort Worth, and I was born where my parents were teachers. And then when they finished that semester, then they moved back to Fort Worth. That's where they were from. And so I was 8 months old when I moved to Fort Worth and lived there ever since, and most of it in East Fort Worth. And no, I did have my ambition when I was a little girl. I wanted to be a dress designer. I just thought that'd be the most wonderful thing. Yes, I thought that'd be the most wonderful thing in the world. And by the time I was in high school, I was designing all my own clothes and making all my own clothes and going to college and then to be a teacher. And I was a high school English and journalism teacher for 9 years and had my 3 children during that time. And then I left teaching because I love teaching, but I couldn't make a house payment. So we never pay teachers what they deserve. We never paid police officers what they deserve. But that was the situation, and so I left and went into business. And the first business I went into was building custom homes. And this is exactly how that happened. I said, I've lived in homes all my life, and so I could build one. And I talked a banker into financing it. I had a net worth of $2,700 to my name. And why that banker ever loaned me that money, I I'm sure he's not a banker anymore. That was a bad deal. But I built 3 homes and lived in one of them for 18 years. And then I got in politics. And there wasn't a plan. I felt like the part of Fort Worth I lived in, East Fort Worth, I just didn't feel like they were getting what they should, in their neighborhoods. And so I got just really involved in neighborhood things. And then Bob Boland was the mayor, and he put me in his chair of the zoning commission. The zoning commission is a appointed body, and it decides, well, this part of the city will be residential and this sort of will be high multifamily and that sort of thing. I did that and enjoyed it. And so I decided, some people came to me and said, would you serve on the city council from East Fort Worth? It will help you get elected. And I thought, that's probably the best way I could help this part of the city is being on the city council. I was on one term, and Bob Boland retired, and he gave a speech at the downtown Rotary saying he'd enjoyed all his time as mayor, but he was going to take some time off, and he was going to not going to run again, and they needed to elect Kay Granger as mayor. And the press started calling me, and I said, I think there's been a mistake. I really do.
Was that an aspiration that you had at that time? Had you already?
No, not at all.
Okay,
no.
Interesting.
No.
Interesting.
He helped me a lot when I was on the city council that one term. He was just a great mayor, and he would talk about what he was doing and take me on some of the speeches he gave and things like that. And I didn't realize he was grooming me for mayor. I really didn't. I just thought how thankful I was that someone would take that kind of time with me. And so I served then as mayor for 6 years, and again was finishing up and going back to my home and my family. And Pete Guerin, who was the congressman from Fort Worth, called and said, Kay, I just made an announcement I'm not running for Congress again, and you need to run. I said, oh, no. I said, I've got to stay right here and with my 3 children and helping them. And he just was incredibly persuasive.
How old were your kids at that time?
My kids were in high school. When I had my first child, when he was 2, I had twins. So they were all in high school at the same time.
Okay. But they were at kind of a pivotal age there where moving might be impactful in one way or the other, or certainly on them at the time, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And they're all very independent.
He still talked you into it somehow?
Yes, he did. He was just really persuasive. But the odd thing, we had a rule in Fort Worth that if you're the mayor and you talk about doing something else, like in politics, then you have to resign as mayor. And the other part of it is that you couldn't talk to anybody about considering moving to a higher level without resigning. After I did that, then they changed that. So I had to make the decision without talking to anybody.
Mm. And it's mostly because you still need the people to believe the things that you're trying to implement are for the long-term better good, and you don't want them to think that this is just a stepping stone for you, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't. I just had not considered it. And he was a great member of Congress, too. And so he was very persuasive, but in his persuasive, I said, Pete Guerin is a Democrat. I said, Pete, I'm a Republican. He said, okay, I know that. People don't care. And at that time, they really didn't. It wasn't partisan like it is now. And so he worked across the aisle, and I did the same thing when I took his place in Congress, and I always have worked that way.
Interesting. So by the time you stepped into there, and we're kind of skipping ahead because you lived a fast life there. But
Right.
when you entered into Congress, you didn't get any. You hear lots of stories from people more currently than not, or at least I have, about the division and about reaching across the hall for ideas and collaboration and things like that. Do you think that over the years that has digressed somewhat, because you hear a lot
It
of that?
really has, and it's such a shame. It's such a shame. You don't get as good a product when you say we're just going to do it my way. And this is the most divided I've ever seen the Congress.
Well, how do we get out of a situation like that? I mean, with someone like you, that what I do know about you is that you are an open-minded person. You've collaborated. You've had ideas that would be considered on both sides of the fence by different people, but you're still obviously admired and successful. So how can more people become like you and see the way that you do?
I think one of the things, you have to look for it while they're running for office and say, does this person's ideas and beliefs fit what I think is important? Because you'll be enticed to be partisan, and you really have to know yourself pretty well to do something like that. I mean, you have to know. I knew that being in a very partisan position would not make me happy. I mean, I like to work with people and all types of people. I had a great opportunity when I was. We have a group of members of Congress that we elect, that they get to vote on people if they're going into a particular position. Like the position I was up for was to chair the largest committee in the Congress, which is the Appropriations Committee. It has all the money. That's what we do. How do we spend that money? And so when I did that, then the woman that was if you're in the majority, you're the chair. If you're in the minority, you're the ranking member. I would be the chair. She would be the ranking member. And we'd never worked together. We just owned different things that were important. And so we got together, and she said, I don't think they've ever had two women run a committee, any committee. I said, oh, surely not. That sure could be. Well, it was true. So we decided we were getting the first two women, we were getting everything on time, on budget, and work together. And we became very fast friends. I mean, we really worked together so well. And so we did a lot of that intentionally, so maybe it would convince other people that was the way to work.
Yeah.
That it just was better.
And who was that?
We had some luck in some places, yep. Nita Lowy from Connecticut.
Okay. That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, I find a lot of people that vote, you have to appeal to people that are very inquisitive, that you also have to reach the lowest common denominator. And a lot of people still vote just based on how your actions are going to affect them personally. And so sometimes it becomes seemingly difficult to even determine what someone's personal ideas or beliefs are, because it becomes so contentious that you feel like it's off-putting to either side, because they're scrapping for attention and they're on generally surface issues, or the things that they're talking about the other side are so outrageous that it most of it doesn't make sense to the intelligent person. So how do you get around some of that? You see a lot of the some of the extreme ads and things. How do you actually find out what these people are about?
I want people to know what I stand for and what's important to me and how it affects them. And so I put it in writing. And so I don't get into it's my way or the highway. This is what I think is important. At the time when I was mayor for our city, when I came into Congress, it was for the nation. When I came in as the city as the mayor, well, everyone knew what the most important thing that was, and that was to the crime. The crime. And your book is. I wish everyone could read that book.
Oh, thank you.
Because the people that say, we should do away with the police, they should read that book and really understand what you're saying, because that was extraordinary. and an extraordinary time. And to think about Fort Worth, Texas having that crime, that type of crime, people really need to. I wish everyone could read it. It was fascinating.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for taking the time to do that. It means a lot. And it's fascinating, too, to a lot of people that read it because it's still, socioeconomically segregated to where, most folks just didn't realize that whole sector exists and carries on. But I'm like, hey, this is a large city here. And pretty much every large metropolitan city has a gang and drug problem, and they're going to have police problems that come along with that because the growth itself, has to be adjusted and priorities adjusted. And again, you're trying to raise expectations on law enforcement while keeping the pay down in a lot of places. And then we're in a conundrum like we are now, where there are significant issues to look at. And it's harder to find police officers, and it's kind of a backwards way to say, well, if you just give them more money, then it'll work out better. I mean, that's not a great sales pitch right now, so it's a tough little spot we're in right now. What are your thoughts on generally crime and approaching stuff like that in this day and age?
I just didn't really understand when I came in as mayor what the crime was like, and because as you said, it's in one part of the city, and if that's not your part of the city, you're just not that aware of it. But I had one of the best learning experiences. I had a young woman, I bet she was about 35. She came to every city council meeting, and she would just berate me about what was going on in the city and that I didn't know what was going on, and just every single time. So she said, I bet you've never even been to my neighborhood. And I said, I don't know what neighborhood you live in, but you never asked me. But if you'd like me to come visit your neighborhood, I'll do it. Would you like to do this afternoon? She was startled by that. She said, no, I can't do it this afternoon. But I said, well, you just choose a day, except Tuesday. That's when our council meetings. She lived in public housing, and it was the best learning experience that I've ever had, because it was in August. There's no air conditioning. It was 4 stories. There was lots of children there. No place for them to play, no swings, it was just a terrible place to live. And I took my city council too, so we were all there to see it. And I said, this just shouldn't happen. And so she became my helper to change things. But the main thing we changed is all the shooting that went on in this huge public housing complex. And I said, who's doing this? Well, the guys that lived there. It turned out that in that public housing, 96% of the public housing was to a single woman with children. Then where the people, the men that were there, we got a waiver to say in that public housing, if the person who has the public housing in their name allows someone in that place where he lives and she lives to commit a crime, the woman who has her name and her children lose their public housing. Well, they kicked those men out overnight. I mean, they were gone. And said, I'm not going to lose my housing because you decide to shoot up the place. And it was the most amazing transformation. And so what we did in exchange for that, then we had the air conditioning put in, we had a library put in there, we had teachers that would come after school and help the students. We had all sorts of playground equipment. It became a different place. And that's what we owed them.
Yeah, we need to continue to do more things like that. And obviously that costs money, and it requires awareness and an appreciation for what somebody's experiencing. I think a lot of us just lose sight of reality because some problems seem steep until you recognize what other people are going through like that. I
We
admire you
live
for
in
doing that.
our neighborhoods and our lives and think everybody else does too, and that's just not the situation.
Yeah,
As you know.
Yeah, and they
Well,
often get bullied, and they get bullied into trafficking stuff and everything else because they can stand in the way. Some people get some of that extra money, so that's an admirable thing that you did for sure. And those types of things just need to persist, obviously, because there's always going to be a poorer neighborhood.
And we just can't send everyone to prison.
Right.
You did just a masterful, unbelievable what you did in Fishbowl operation. But we've got to start with those little children. Yeah. And so many of them don't have a father at home. They just live, from day to day. And when I was teaching in high school, I could spot people in the high school and think that they're not going to make it. They're just not going to make it because there was never any follow through. And most of them dropped out second year in high school.
Any ideas of ways that we could improve that situation? Because it seems like teachers are at such a disadvantage. We also need the teachers to be at least in a position where they feel like they can have an impact in some of the poorer schools and have a way to get kids help that they, have that instinct about that is intuitive feeling that, that they need help or whatever. Are there anything like that?
And that we care about them.
Yeah, obviously. Is there any ideas of ways we could do that or any
there are
programs?
Lots of programs, and a lot of churches are putting on programs to provide for children and help them, tutor them, but feed them. When this pandemic hit, the biggest scare was children who get at least 2 of their meals at their school, and the school closes. Now what happens? So there are all sorts of programs. There just aren't enough of them to put your arms around children as children and help them through that.
And what are there some ways that you are aware of that we could bring more attention to some of those issues just to get more, more collaboration, volunteering, finances, anything like that behind things like that you're aware of?
Well, there are so many nonprofits here that really do that and do it very well. There's just not enough of them. And to take on that kind of responsibility. But the churches are seeing it more. And then in the elementary schools, there's looking for teachers that are willing to do that, willing to go beyond just, I'm going to teach you math, but I'm going to teach you how to live.
Yeah. And that's kind of what they end up doing anyway. That's kind of the nobility of being a teacher. There's so many ancillary things that come out of being a teacher and inspiring kids and everything. So I really admire the fact that you came from that as well. And you said you studied English. You taught English and journalism. Is that correct? You said?
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. So when we talk about throwing people in jail, and as you know, I've experienced this too. I mean, as a police officer, that's part of your job, but I also think there's a responsibility beyond that scope as well. What are your thoughts on the fact that we have the overcrowding of prisons? We still have the disparate racial makeup in the prisons, and there's lots of communities. Just spent some time in Maryland, and they're doing a lot of things where they're just, some of the communities the municipalities are ignoring certain drug crimes in order to curb this problem, and essentially ignoring what laws are in place in order to make amends. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on ways that we can start making some change?
Yes, I have always thoroughly enjoyed finding cities that are doing it right, that have something that we don't have, that some kind of outreach, and just stealing that and say, we can do this in Fort Worth. We do have a very can-do spirit, and we're now double the size the city was when I was mayor. It's reaching 1 million people, the 12th largest in the nation. And I'm not saying that be proud of it. I'm saying it exists. So the more people you have, the more that could be left behind and just don't have that. I know you say when they said, all right, everybody's out of a job, we'll send some checks because they can make their house payment. But then they often didn't go back to work. So you've got a whole extra thing added to families that are really under attack right now. And if you just can't even pay your rent, then your children are going to suffer. So I think we've got a lot to do, but we have to recognize it first. That's why your book was just, it should be good reading for everyone, because I lived during that time and I didn't know it was that serious.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
And I was mayor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there was a lot of similar types of crimes. I mean, obviously, in that particular issue, we leveraged drugs to get to violent criminals, just because of my profile. That's what I ended up doing. But do you think that by curbing some of the drug laws, since there's such an overrun of people in the prison system with drug offenses, and in my particular case, a lot of them ended up being drug offenses, but that was the only way we could associate them to the gang. But assuming that they're not gang members and things like that, is there any hope to trying to curb that by affecting some of the drug laws, or any thoughts? I'm not trying to corner you, but
has to be. And it's the drug usage, serious drug usage, went up 39% during this pandemic. 39%. So it was already serious. It's much more serious now.
Yeah. And so how do we tackle that? If we're trying to curb the number of people that are dealing drugs per se in the prisons, and then at the same time trying to actually promote wellness and recovery to people that are addicted. I mean, it seems like kind of a catch-22, right?
It really is. It really is. And what you did with that, wasn't it 51 that you put into prison? A lot of long prisons. Well, you had to do that. Someone had to do that to get them off our streets and out of our neighborhoods. But the continuing help, go back again to the schools. A lot of them know who's dealing drugs or involved in drugs, and so do we have a treatment that can get them off drugs, and then maybe they can make good decisions, because they're not able to make good decisions, as you know, when they're taking those drugs all the time. So put them in prison, but it becomes a revolving door if we don't do something or many things better.
Right. For the addicts and mental issues that are associated with that. And obviously comes along with dealing drugs comes violent crime and things that are just associated, because if you're in a poorer neighborhood and you have valuable narcotics in your home, then you've got to protect yourself from getting robbed, because that's the way of the world and how things work. And so it kind of perpetuates the whole process there too. So I do agree with you, and appreciate your insight on education, because that's really the way that we're trying to tackle things. From my perspective as well, as you put certain number of people in jail, but then you've got to go back and find the kids that were left behind and see if you can mentor them into a better way, and which takes us back to education, including teachers. So I know that you had mentioned
and then you give them hope. If you said, yes, you can do this, and there are lots of programs like that that work with most of them adolescents, and say, okay, and we did this when I was growing up. There was an orphan's home, that they just made a movie about that orphan's home. Well, my mother, it was in Fort Worth, my mother did some teaching there, just as her kind of way to give back. And then when she did that, she'd also invite the young, usually it was a young man, and to come over and have Sunday dinner with us, and talk, and we'd go to a movie and whatever. And we did that the whole time I was growing up. And so she was always looking for ways to make a difference, and you could capture them in a way that gives them hope that they can live what we call a normal life.
That sounds like an amazing woman. Was she part of the inspiration for you becoming a teacher in the first place, I assume?
Absolutely, yeah. She was a wonderful teacher. She was just everybody's favorite teacher, and people would stop me and say, "I didn't know that Mrs. Mullendore was your mother." And I said, yes. Oh, and they all had a story. They all had a story of something she had done personally for them, some particular thing that made them feel better. One woman said she had a special nickname for me. And I said, really, what was it? And she told me, and she said, that was my special name. And her name was Arabella, is what she got. Well, my mother couldn't remember names, so she called all the girls Arabella and all the boys Charlie. But they didn't know that she was calling everyone that. that woman, and I didn't tell her, but I called my sister and I said, you won't believe this. And I told her, I said, we had no idea. But I said, that's what she was doing. She couldn't remember her name, so she just said, I'll give you a special name. She was a special person. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny?
It sounds all too familiar. That sounds like a guy thing, honestly, because that's the way I live. I mean, I've for people that know me, I certainly married up, and not only is she a lot on a different level than I am, but she is also my memory bank half the time. I need to ask her what I'm supposed to do, where I'm supposed to find what, et cetera. So, and speaking of that, so
reading that book, I kept wondering about your wife and how she lived through that because from worry, but obviously she's just a remarkable person.
Absolutely.
I loved what you said about her.
Oh, and yeah, and her, I mean, her role is extraordinary, and it's not just a role of support. I mean, she has, good educated input and an unbiased view of certain things that I was stuck trying to do and was kind of uni-focused on. So, and I kind of continue through life the same way. I appreciate what she brings to the table for sure. So we're definitely a team, but she's the team leader for sure. And we've seen, so we're in business together in some different things as well. So I wanted to also ask you about, you've done such remarkable things through this process, but it can't be ignored the fact that you are a woman and have reached heights that are normally a lot more difficult for women to reach because it's kind of a man-driven industry that you're in, certainly now, in government. And you talked about the appropriation committee successes and all those types of things. What were some of the hardships or struggles that you might have experienced being a female trying to come up in a male-dominated industry? Were there any?
Well, I chose my battles. I didn't go around saying, you have to do this for me because I'm a woman. But I wouldn't be taken off the list because I was a woman. When I was a mayor, I had a very, very successful developer that was looking at Texas to come to and start developments. And so he asked to have a meeting with me, and I said, fine. And I had my city manager there. And if in that office as mayor, if you're a friend coming to see me, I just sat out in the middle of the room with, the chairs that way. But if I wanted to make sure they understood that I'm in charge, I would sit behind my desk, with my desk in front of me, big desk. So this man makes his presentation, and I ask him a question. And my chief of staff was sitting to my left, and he looks at my chief of staff and answers the question to him. So I asked another question, and he did the same thing. So I asked to my city manager, would you change chairs? And he said, is there something wrong with your chair? And I said, no, I just want you to sit here in my desk. So he sat down, very puzzled. I sat down in his chair, and I looked the developer, right in the eye, and I said, now maybe you can answer my questions. And he turned red, and he was angry, and it didn't make any difference. But I bet he never did that to a woman again.
You might be surprised. It's unfortunate, but I know the battle wages on, and that's why I ask, because and my wife's in the similar predicament, in high positions in a business, and that exact scenario happens often where she'll ask a question and they'll address the answer to one of the males in the room. It's pretty extraordinary to see. And I know that has to be a hurdle because, again, you're just the fact that you said you have to pick your battles is already putting you at a disadvantage because no one else has to say, well, I have to pick my battles in order to overcome the disposition that I am in nature, So, and I think it's extraordinary what you've accomplished leveraging those tactics. So, I'm very happy that it has worked out. have any kind of suggestions or encouragement or things that you've leveraged in the past for other women that might aspire to do things in business? I mean, you've succeeded in business and in teaching and education, and you're certainly, by the way, your book is also fantastic. And obviously you know how to write, so you didn't have to go through a bunch of training to get that thing down. Your knowledge of America is great, and you talk about what is right in America. I like that. So is there anything, since this is, I think, an American issue still, but often isn't discussed as often when some of the other issues come to play, is there anything you could suggest to anyone else that has aspirations to do things and how they could do that?
I never tried to downsize myself. I pushed myself all the time. You know, when I decided I could be a custom home builder because I'd lived in a home, you know, that's crazy. But I think in some kind, you know, there's a God wink, they call it. And I think that banker for some reason said, I'm just going to take a chance on this woman. But there's some things like that I try to meet with as many women's groups and young women and say, you've got the whole world ahead of you. So don't think you have to make it smaller. Say, go for it. You won't get it all the first time, but do it. And I really encourage so many. Though I failed miserably because when I was elected to Congress, I was the first Republican woman ever to serve in the House of Representatives. And I said, that can't be true. And it was. And 23 years later, I was still the only Republican woman from Texas in the Congress until the last election. And Beth Van Doon, she was elected, and so now there are two of us. But I think so many people would say, I just don't know whether I can do that. Now, you also have to, there's a lot of things you have to put up with, like traveling back and forth to Washington, D.C. every week. I waited until my children, in that case, my children were grown in college, and I couldn't have done it when they were small. That's just too much. But it's just important, particularly if you're talking about making our laws, that we have everybody at the table, men, women, Black, Hispanic, everyone. And we need that perspective. So,
right. I totally agree. And that job is not for everyone either. It's a special task. So it's already difficult to navigate things like that, per some of the questions I had. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I think your story can really carry to a lot of people and change a perspective, and at the very least start some productive conversations. And that's what we're all about here. So your generosity and grace here today is so much appreciated. I can't thank you enough. And I encourage people to check out your book as well. And it's a great perspective and an interesting historical introspective. So I didn't get to all my questions, but I want to be respectful of your time and appreciate.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. And any way I can help in any way, anything that I can do to help you, just give me a call.
Thank you so much, Ms. Granger. Take care and have a great day.
Candy boy on the south side in a game like nobody knew. To get by, had to let go of the idea that the government knew. The slave labor peace make a rich, hate a no favor, poor man doing what he gotta do. The dream to be king made it harder to see that his kingdom set him up for a coup. Well, it's the land of the free and home.